Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we are witnessing a geopolitical earthquake that is shaking not only the Middle East, but also the very foundations of Vladimir Putin's global strategy. Iran, Russia's most critical ally outside Europe, is erupting. Millions of people have poured into the streets across Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, Shiraz, Tabriz, and dozens of smaller cities. What began as scattered protests has now transformed into something far more dangerous for those in power. A nationwide uprising that many analysts believe could push the Iranian regime toward total collapse, and as this chaos unfolds, one man in Moscow is watching with absolute panic. For Vladimir Putin, Iran is not just another partner. It is a pillar of Russia's resistance against the West. It is a weapons supplier, a sanctions busting ally, an energy collaborator, and a strategic counterweight to American influence in the Middle East. Now that pillar is cracking, and if it falls, the shockwaves could cripple Russia's war effort in Ukraine, destabilize Moscow's influence across the region, and expose the Kremlin as more isolated than ever before. The streets of Iran tell a story the regime can no longer hide. Protesters are not chanting for reform. They are chanting for the end. Videos show massive crowds tearing down images of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, burning regime banners, and openly calling for the downfall of the Islamic Republic. Security forces are overwhelmed. Internet blackouts are failing. Even elite units are reportedly refusing orders in some cities. This is not a protest movement that can be crushed overnight. This is sustained, organized, and fueled by years of economic misery, repression, corruption, and international isolation. Iran's economy has been suffocating under sanctions, inflation, unemployment, and currency collapse. Ordinary Iranians can barely afford food, fuel, or medicine. Young people see no future. Women have become the face of resistance, openly defying the regime's most powerful symbols of control. And now workers, students, shopkeepers, oil employees, and even families of security personnel are joining in. The regime's narrative of control is collapsing faster than its ability to respond. As Iran burns internally, Putin's fear is growing externally. Russia depends heavily on Iran for military drones that have been used extensively against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Mashhad drones, rebranded by Russia, have become a key component of Moscow's battlefield strategy. If Iran's government collapses or becomes too unstable to maintain production and supply, Russia loses a crucial lifeline. That loss would immediately weaken Moscow's ability to sustain its war campaign. Beyond drones, Iran has helped Russia evade sanctions through shadow oil trading, banking channels, and logistics networks. Iranian ports, companies, and intermediaries have quietly enabled Moscow to keep money flowing when Western restrictions tightened. A collapsing Iran means those networks disappear overnight. Putin would be left with fewer options, fewer allies, and fewer ways to keep Russia's economy afloat under pressure. But the danger does not stop there. A regime collapse in Tehran could trigger a regional chain reaction. Hezbollah, heavily funded and armed by Iran, could face disruption. Militias across Iraq, Syria, and Yemen could lose coordination and resources. Russia's military footprint in Syria, which relies partly on Iranian cooperation, could become exposed. Putin's carefully constructed alliance system in the Middle East would unravel piece by piece. This is why Kremlin insiders are reportedly calling the situation in Iran a nightmare scenario. Russia's propaganda machine has gone unusually quiet about the protests. State media avoids coverage or frames it as minor unrest caused by foreign agents. The silence itself reveals fear. When Moscow avoids a topic, it is usually because the truth is too dangerous to acknowledge. Putin understands something very clearly: revolutions are contagious. Russia itself has a population exhausted by war, economic strain, mobilization, and censorship. If Iranians succeed in bringing down a powerful, heavily armed authoritarian regime, it sends a message that no dictatorship is invincible. That message terrifies the Kremlin more than any NATO statement ever could. Inside Iran, the regime is attempting its familiar playbook: arrests, executions, intimidation, and media blackouts. But the scale of resistance is overwhelming. Social media continues to flood with footage despite restrictions. Funerals of slain protesters turn into new demonstrations. Each act of repression fuels more anger. Each death strengthens the movement instead of silencing it. What makes this uprising especially dangerous is its lack of a single leader. The regime cannot arrest an idea. There is no one figure to eliminate, no headquarters to raid, no negotiation table to manipulate. This is a decentralized revolt driven by shared rage and collective despair. It is spontaneous, unpredictable, and increasingly bold. Western intelligence agencies are watching closely. While governments remain cautious in their statements, analysts openly admit that Iran is closer to systemic collapse now than at any time in decades. Even if the regime survives this wave, it will emerge weaker, more paranoid, and less capable of supporting allies like Russia. For Putin, timing could not be worse. Russia is already stretched thin militarily and economically. Ukraine continues to resist. Western support remains strong. Sanctions are tightening. Domestic dissent is growing quietly beneath the surface. Losing Iran at this moment would be a strategic disaster. Reports suggest that Moscow has offered intelligence assistance to Tehran, including surveillance technology and crowd control expertise. This alone shows how desperate the situation has become. Russia, once a global power broker, is now scrambling to keep an ally from collapsing under the weight of its own people's anger. But even Russian support may not be enough. History shows that when a population reaches a breaking point, foreign assistance cannot save a regime forever. The Soviet Union itself learned that lesson the hard way, and Putin knows it. He lived through that collapse. He remembers the fear, the chaos, and the humiliation. That memory is now resurfacing as he watches Iran teeter on the edge. The protesters know the risks. They face bullets, prisons, and death, yet they continue. That alone signals how deep the crisis has become. When fear disappears, regimes fall. If Iran's leadership fractures, if the military splits, if oil workers strike en masse, the collapse could accelerate rapidly. Markets would panic, oil prices would spike, regional power balances would shift overnight. Russia would lose not just an ally, but a cornerstone of its resistance to Western pressure. And this is why Putin is panicking. Not because of sympathy for Iran's rulers, but because their fate is tied directly to his own strategic survival. A free or unstable Iran would rewrite the geopolitical map. It would weaken Russia, embolden Ukraine, strengthen Western leverage, and inspire opposition movements everywhere authoritarian leaders rule by fear. As millions continue marching through Iranian streets, chanting against tyranny, the world watches. And in the Kremlin, behind closed doors, planners are confronting a reality they never wanted to face. The collapse of Iran's regime would not just be Tehran's problem. It would be Moscow's nightmare. History may soon record this moment as the beginning of the end, not only for a regime in Tehran, but for the fragile alliance system that has allowed Vladimir Putin to challenge the global order. When the streets speak louder than guns, even the most powerful rulers begin to tremble. And right now, from Tehran to Moscow, the ground is shaking,